Well, I actually want to mirror what Doc was saying earlier. The good part in vaccines is that innovation is higher than ever, and the market is growing a lot faster than the normal pharma market. But for the last 3 years, the financial situation has kind of changed the rules. What we see is earning by big pharma is challenged now, and that of course makes them focus on getting something to fill that gap. And in that way, they are looking for late-stage product. And that, of course, creates an even bigger gap in the early development, both in vaccine and in small molecules. Recently, the vaccine deals has actually gone down by 30% for the last 2 years. And that is actually an alarming number when we think about innovation being on the highest and a lot of new technologies are actually available out there. And that again leads to a second problem which kind of pushes out the venture capital because they are in for a short investment. And if they see a bigger gap and see pharma going in even later, they are also part of expanding that gap. And if this continue, a lot of the venture capital will probably leave the development of new vaccines. Basically, most of the vaccine deals that are made after proof of concept in the clinical setting, and that's pretty late in the vaccine development, which probably started 12 or 11 years before that. My company, Bavarian Nordic, is on the stock market in Denmark, and we have kind of a different way of funding most of our research, as also is the case for emerging biosolution. We are into medical countermeasures. We have big contracts with BARDA that funds a lot of our research and also has a spillover to basic research. We have gotten a lot of grant for NIH, NIAID to fund early research. And actually a couple of months ago, we entered into, I think it was $25 million government grant that scientific groups will be looking for small remnants of virus in cancer cells because technologies has gone to a stage now where that can be found. And that's again public money. And I think that's the main challenge we're going to see in this bear market, so to speak, where money are expensive. So a lot of the companies are focusing on getting government funds, getting other ways of financing themselves. That, of course, also influenced the structure of deals. The deals where we saw large upfront payments are kind of changing to more complex models. And of course, as pharma enters later into the stage, the investment from the other partners and the biotech has also been that much bigger. So in many of the late-stage deals, the partners actually meet rather far apart and need to find a common ground. We actually have a phase 2 cancer product, Prostvac, and we have been out discussing with a lot of different partners and finding the right partner to partner up with doing our phase 3. And of course, any deal that is made when you're on the public stock market, if the public stock market thinks the deal is not good enough, you're going to get hurt on the stock market. So it's not just getting the right deal, it's also about how your owner structure is and how your own financial situation is. And we actually gone out here a couple of weeks ago, actually to the stock market, to finance ourselves the phase 3 study. And one of the factors of that is, of course, the financial situation, where the deals are structured differently, and that we expect a bigger return for our investors by actually financing it ourselves all the way through. And that's the problem. When big pharma go in later, the incentive for someone to do it themselves will also become bigger. So unless the deal structure is changing when pharma enters later and later, we'll probably see more advanced biotech companies taking the product all the way to the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Lars. Chip, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and about Genosha and whether you're seeing deals that have back-end returns and contingencies and option structures?
Sure. Can you hear me? Good. So my company, Genosha Biosciences, is a Cambridge, Mass-based vaccine discovery and development company. We're built around a platform technology that enables the rapid identification of new antigens, especially T-cell antigens. And using that, we have developed a portfolio of 5 vaccines in early research and moving rapidly toward the clinic, spanning both the therapeutic and prophylactic vaccines for HSV-2, the most advanced of which is the therapeutic vaccine for which we expect to enter the clinic next year. We also have programs for chlamydia, pneumococcus, and malaria. We've been very fortunate with this technology and with this pipeline to attract funding from a couple of different sources. We have a terrific collaboration with PATH for our pneumococcus vaccine, and we have collaborations with actually the Navy for our malaria vaccine and some NIH funding for our chlamydia vaccine. Our venture investors have put thus far $60 million into the company, partly on the promise of the technology overall, but not surprisingly, largely focused on the most advanced program, the one that is, as I said, the HSV-2 vaccine to enter the clinic next year. Not unreasonably, they're expecting that if we have success there, we will be in a position for lots of different types of deals. But where option-based deal making, where perhaps back-ended deal making could be most relevant for Genosha is in the rest of the program. Most of our venture capital will go to our most advanced vaccine. And so Genosha is open for business. We'd be delighted to do deals to help us advance the rest of the pipeline. And we recognize fully, just to echo the themes that we've heard really throughout this conference, that there is a paucity of interest in taking significant risk. I don't think any BD person, and of which I've been one for a long time, feels that they are going to get any great reward for going out on a limb on a new technology that has with it significant risk. And in that circumstance, and in a circumstance in general where pharma R&D budgets are constrained, where VCs have fewer monies to invest, et cetera, we've heard this story many times, back-weighted deals are ones that can be appealing. They're appealing to us because we get the opportunity to date before we marry. We can focus on the things that we think we know how to do reasonably well. I mean, big pharma is great, we love you, but clinical development is a commodity business. There wouldn't be a CRO industry if that were not the case. And so we would love to be able to hold on to our assets for as long as possible. And a back-weighted deal is something that could enable that. So, we're as I said again, I'll keep repeating, we're open for business, we're looking for deals to advance our programs, and we understand that the earlier monies may be comparatively constrained relative to the benefits that we hope to be able to show with our vaccines as they continue to advance.
Common challenges. Dr. Waddell, could you tell us a little bit about GlobeImmune and particularly the kind of deal structures you're seeing available or being?
Yeah, let me start out. Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
So GlobeImmune is a company that was spun out of the University of Colorado about 10 years ago, and it's based on a platform technology that involves the use of recombinant yeast, specifically Saccharomyces, as vectors to generate immune responses. And what's characteristic of the immune response to yeast is that it's predominantly a T-cell or a cellular response. And what that means is that it gives us access to a series of diseases that include basically all cancers as well as all chronic infectious diseases. So we're working more in the area of therapeutic vaccines because that's the area where cellular immunity is probably more critical. We have taken 3 products so far into the clinic. One of them is a product that targets the mutated RAS oncogene product that drives about 170,000 new solid tumor cases a year in the United States. We also have a product that is now through phase 2 that we're preparing for pivotal trials targeting hepatitis C, which, as you all know, is an area that is seeing a lot of drug development, although mostly drug development rather than therapeutic vaccine development. We did a deal with Celgene that we announced about 2 years ago. That was a very broad-based oncology deal that is option-based and was about a $40 million upfront and has an overall lifetime value of about $500 million, so a sizable deal. So our infectious disease assets are not currently partnered.
I just wanted to ask, are the additional revenues that are in the deal, are those milestone-based?
Milestones and royalties, yeah.
Milestone and royalties.
Yeah. But, so having said that, let me just make a comment about risk and then a comment about option deal structures. One of the things I think that is different that has a significant impact on our strategy is that because we're developing a whole series of products that are based on a common vector platform technology, each one of the programs de-risks another one, and so exactly where a program falls on the translational versus clinical continuum is a bit different for us, and we actually now have we've done this 3 times, we can move from essentially a cDNA for a target of interest to a product that we can actually take into the clinic in under a year, and we've done that now 3 times, and because safety issues tend to be platform-based rather than specific target-based, we can leverage all of our previous data and kind of move ourselves to a later stage discussion. What I want to say about options is that, you know, I think that there's a lot of attention being paid to option deals and to kind of risk sharing and those sorts of things, but I may be older than I look, although I'm looking older these days, but I did my first deal in the biotech industry in 1986 with what was then Marion Laboratories, which was actually the inventor of large pharma small company deals. And that was an option deal. It was on a thrombolytic, and it was very light on upfront. And it was based on essentially figuring out whether this thrombolytic that we had could be made recombinantly and whether it was active. So this is really not new news. The other point I would make is that I think that option deals are really, the option structure is more of an accounting issue than it is a underlying sort of component of risk. And the way that a lot of these deals look is that there's an upfront payment that is an option, that's buying an option. The company then does some development work, and then there's a point at which the option gets struck. That's really not a lot different from getting an upfront payment and a year of R&D funding, at which point the company can decide whether they want to continue on the program or not. So I'm not sure, number one, things have changed that much over time, and I'm also not sure that an option deal is that different from a more conventional licensing deal.
We heard from our large pharma brothers earlier today that the threshold is going up. Their willingness to take risk, to take on unproven programs has gone down. And I wonder whether the option deal is likely to increase as a way, or become more common as a way to get the big pharma in without laying out as much, particularly early on. So a sort of a risk mitigation strategy for them. Because certainly there are advantages to having a partner, such as access to infrastructure, to accumulated expertise, and to be honest, validation, which any biotech covets.
Yeah, I mean, I guess valuation I think is more stage dependent than who the customer is. Valuations are lower when venture funds put in money at the translational level, and valuations are going to be lower, and there's going to be more risk sharing when pharma invests at an earlier stage.
Are there questions people have before we burn up too much of our available time here? Okay. I think, Chip, were you going to further comment on it?
Nothing earth-shattering.
Yeah, I certainly think the issue of risk threshold is a lot of it. An option agreement, it seems to me, by its very virtue, is sort of how to cut the difference between the innovator company who believes there's a high value and they deserve a high return versus the, the partner who maybe has a bigger checkbook but isn't quite sure they want to lay out as much money as you're demanding for it. So options, you're right, they've always been around in one form or another.
But they're good for us. They allow us to evaluate the partners as well. And in our circumstance, for example, where each of our programs is likely to be competing with a program internal to the potential partner's pipeline, then we have the opportunity to essentially compete. They get to see how their asset stacks up against ours and likewise. And it will allow that company to, I think, come into our program with eyes wide open about the benefits, for us to have come in eyes wide open about them as a potential partner. And by the way, if they don't want to come in, we still have a viable asset.
I actually think that option deals it depends on where you are in your development. If you go in a late stage program and do an option deal, of course depending on the structure of your company, but if you are a publicly traded company like we are, that will not be taken well doing a phase 2 option deal. So I think option deals are early deals for companies that are funded privately or by venture capitalists. But if you're a company that's a little bigger, that already has the foundation of funding in place, option deals on the late stage is not an option, so to speak.
Right.
It's about expectations. Public companies can't set expectations, private companies can.
Yeah.
It seems to be the logical next question, which is in ways unfair to you, but it is part of the intended topic here. And I think it really must influence to a large extent what kind of deal structures you're willing to go into. Do you believe that the public markets will recover? I'm not trying to take you totally out of your comfort zone, but the advanced question was, will recovering public markets weaken or even shut down? And I think the relevance is, depending on your read on that, you either will enter into a deal where the returns are heavily back-end weighted, or you may, if you feel that public markets are going to be somewhat open to you, look to equity capital. Lars, you have access to a different range of investors.
Yeah, well, the public market will of course recover. It always goes up and down. I think there is a change in the public market, and that change is that the professional investors get more and more insight into the pharma business. And that actually means that the public market are not in this situation, but in general, taking the overall drop in the public market into consideration, more willing to invest in late stage products. So you can actually go to the public market to finance after phase 2. And there are a lot of people in the public market that has enough understanding to evaluate and make that possible. And that of course becomes, so to speak, a competitor to big pharma. Yeah. The later they push their partnership, the more will go to the public market to raise it. The more IPOs we will see in biotech at the right point, because the venture capitalist that has invested, they need a return. They don't have 7 years. So if no upfront loaded deals are available for the companies that are not in the public market, they will go to the public market if their pipeline is promising.
So that's exactly where I wanted to go with the conversation. Your decisions on what deal structures we'll enter into are largely dependent on what other sources of funding that you believe are available. Yeah. So what are your thoughts? And I'm going to expand that a little bit to ask about NGO funding. And if you were here earlier this week, you heard about the new national vaccine plan, which is supposed to stimulate and provide resources for globalization in the vaccine space. So, do you think that the public markets and other sources of development capital will be opening up?
Well, I can only speak on behalf of my company. We have been so lucky that we have gotten a lot of public funding. We have big contracts with BARDA more than 800 million US dollars contracts ongoing. We have contracts with NIH, we have contracts with NCI, with research collaborations in Denmark and Germany. So we have a lot of our funding actually comes from government and NGOs, especially also for some of our early programs, even though we are publicly traded.
So you developed your business in a way that you're less dependent on, either less dependent on public markets and also less dependent on the pharma partners.
Yes.
Chip and Tim?
Well, I would say one thing. One of the interesting things about public money from a small company perspective. So our view of things is very different from your view of things. If you actually look at the distribution of what all of the bioterrorism and flu preparedness and where all of that money went, that money did not go to small companies. Those were gigantic purchase contracts that required established manufacturing facilities and all of that. So that hasn't really been particularly helpful to us. We take a run at it from time to time, and there are some targets that we're working on that we think will be of interest to NGOs and to governments, but it's not really a fundamental part of our strategy. The other point I was going to make, to go back to the public markets for a second, is it's important to differentiate between the public markets and the IPO market. Public markets are wide open. People are raising huge amounts of money for established healthcare
You're thinking
companies.
the secondary market.
The real issue at this point is the IPO market, which tends to be pretty much a market of desperation for companies whose venture funds are kind of tapped out. And what that's going to do ultimately is there are deals getting done, and the deals are getting done at really severe haircut valuations. What that means is that the specialist investors, who are the only ones who are investing in those right now, can actually make money because they can actually force the price down. You know, I think eventually that's going to move back in the right direction, but I think running your strategy in terms of partnering versus other options, assuming that that's going to happen in any specific time, is probably a loser's game.
Chip, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would completely agree with what I've heard. I think that, I mean, look, we in this room are from the privileged 15% or so of the world that is relatively well off, and the rest of the world suffers from diseases that we have the opportunity to treat. And in recognition of that, there are huge pools of capital available for things like malaria and pneumococcus and tuberculosis, et cetera. I don't see that changing. Vaccines have been, I mean, vaccines and sanitation are sort of 90% of the improvement in lifespan over the past century. I don't see the recognition of that continues.
Okay. Any last questions before we move on to the next panel? Sorry, right here. Can we get a microphone, please?
Thank you. Benedict Timmerman, Genticell. I was very interested by the remark of Dr. Wagner stating that for a publicly quoted company, an option deal is a dangerous, or is at least a sensitive deal, because the stock market may value this as inefficient, or at least not as optimal as it could be. And on the other hand, if we would pose the option deals more early in private companies, for example, at that moment you have venture capitalists who are looking towards an exit, and for whom an option deal is a postponement of possible exit because the cash will come out later. So there as well, I would actually argue, generally speaking at least, that option deals are not optimal from the biotech side. So if they're not optimal for late stage public biotech companies, or earlier stage privately invested biotech companies, for whom are they actually positive? I would say for pharma, for sure. And so, which makes it even worse in a certain sense, because it means that when you make an option deal, you signal weakness, or you signal weakness in your negotiation power at least. So how do we get around that? I'd like to have the panel give me a solution to how to avoid these kind of situations, given that we have a good portfolio of products.
Anyone want to take a stab at that?
I'm not sure. I had a little bit of difficulty hearing the question, but I think what I heard you saying was, if you're talking about a late stage asset and you're a public company, investors don't like to see option deals. I think that, when you're an early stage venture funded company, I think your investors love seeing anything that's non-dilutive and are happy to have somebody else share the costs. So I think it's different from stage.
I think part of the answer to your question, I'm speaking from, having run three biotech development stage companies in the past. If it truly is a deal structure where the milestone payments, the option payments are outsized, they're very large, that can truly only be justified by proof of principle in the clinic or enrollment in a phase 3, then your investors should applaud it, so long as you have reasonably secure access to the operational funding. I think the ideal structure, from my perspective, is a combination of partnership, maybe BARDA funding or others, where your operational costs are fairly secure. There's not a lot of fat in it, so the funding for those programs isn't going to fund 16 other things, but has some very large milestone payments where the real big return comes from. And then you get into, as Doug Given said, what are the probabilities of success? If you really believe the probability of success is good and you can cover your operational funding, then it shouldn't be viewed as an issue of desperation. But if it's option payments without operational funding, it's probably a plan for death. That's probably the worst of all. But thank you very much. I think we're going to move on.